I know you advertised I was going to speak about Orthodoxy. What I want to speak about specifically is the question and the reality of Hellenism and Orthodoxy. Because these are two concepts that we, as a church, and this Philoptochos specifically, is, I believe, explicitly committed to supporting and to maintaining. And they're two concepts that are very vaguely defined. Hellenism has meant 1,000 things over 3,000 years. The Greeks began, as you all know, in the period of Homer's wars, as various kingdoms. And then as we passed through the Dark Ages in Alava and into what we call the classical period of Athens and Sparta and Corinth, they were the city-states with the different systems of government, whether a tyranny or a democracy or an oligarchy or the various combinations of it. But they never united until the Persians threatened them, and then they united together to drive the Persians out. Then they had the massive war between the Athenians and the Spartans, which lasted for decades. All of you know this, I know. After which, again, they divided into the various city-states until what? Until the time of Alexander. And Alexander was the first who united the Greeks and kept them united. And having united them, then he invaded the Persian Empire, conquered the Persian Empire, conquered as far as India, and then came back to Babylon where he died. Then his kingdom is divided up into 4 kingdoms, in Egypt, in Syria, in Asia Minor, and in Greece. You know, all of you know this, I know. And finally, then his empire was conquered by the Romans. This is the basic history of Hellenism. If we speak of Hellenism and Hellenistic Greek, the Kini, Ellinika, that the Bible is written in, we're speaking of the language that was spoken in Alexander's empire, because he planted his cities, he settled his veterans, and he Hellenized the entire East. What had been Persian, what had been many languages and cultures, came to all be and speak the Greek language. This is the culture into which Christ was born, and because of this, the New Testament was written in the Greek language. Hellenism then continues, combined with the Roman state and the Roman culture up until the time of Constantine, right? At which time this Greek and Roman culture and reality unites with Christianity. And we call then what happens afterwards the Eastern Roman Empire, the Christian Roman Empire, or the scholars say the Byzantine Empire, although it is properly stated that to call them Byzantines is incorrect. They never called themselves Byzantines, they called themselves Romans. This was the understanding. It is important, rather, that we should keep in mind that during the time of the Christian emperors of the Eastern Roman Empire, if you called yourself a Hellenes, you were saying that you were a pagan. If you were a Christian, you called yourself a Roman. And even now, if you go to the city of Antioch, the English translation of the Orthodox Patriarchate in Antioch is the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Antioch. If you look at what it is in Arabic, it's the Roman Orthodox Patriarchate of Antioch. The same thing for the Turks. They don't call us Greeks. They call us Rum, the Romans. There is the new idea of Hellenism that comes, that is given birth to in the late 1700s and the 1800s with the nationalistic ideals that gave birth to the War of Independence in Alava, that is influenced partly by the old Roman heritage of the Greek people and partly by the new scholars in Germany and France and England who were then rediscovering the Greek texts. So there is a complexity to the birth of modern Greece. All of you are aware of this, I know, because you and your families and your parents and grandparents lived it. but we don't think of Hellenism as a complicated concept. Right now, we have something of an unusual situation. Hellenism has always been, or was for 2,000 years, a universal idea. At least it had that ideal behind it. And yet now, Hellenism is always intrinsically tied to the modern Greek state, which is much smaller than ancient Greece, or than the ancient areas in which Greek people lived. As Greek Americans, as Greek Orthodox who live in the diaspora, who live in the United States, we have decisions and choices that need to be made about how we advance Hellenism, how we advance Orthodoxy, and how the two of them interact with one another and with the modern Greek state. It is a question that usually we don't think to ask. This is to speak by way of introduction. I want to go a little bit more deeply into the history. Okay. This is a text from Plutarch. You know who Philoptochos was? Right. He was a Greek historian who lived in Rome in the 1st century AD, I believe. And he has the text that he writes on the fortune of Alexander. I'll read it in English because the ancient Greek is too complicated, I think, for most of us. But he says, and I'll read the entire thing. He's speaking about philosophy and how Alexander applied a certain philosophic ideal in governing and ruling his empire once he had conquered it. Moreover, the much admired Republic, a text that was written by Zeno the philosopher, the founder of the Stoic sect, can be summed up in this one principle: that all the inhabitants of this world of ours should not live separated by their respective rules of justice into separate cities and communities, but that we should consider all men to be of one community and one city. That we should have a common life and an order common to us all, even as a herd that feeds together and shares the pasturage of a common field. This is the high language of the philosophers. So, Zeno wrote this, giving shape to a dream, or as it were a shadowy picture of a well-ordered and philosophic commonwealth. But it was Alexander who gave effect to the idea. For Alexander did not follow Aristotle's advice to treat the Greeks as if he were their leader and other peoples as if he were their master, to have regard for the Greeks as for friends and kindred, but to conduct himself toward other peoples as though they were plants or animals. For to do so would have been to weigh down his leadership with numerous battles and banishments and rebellions. But because he believed that he came as a heaven-sent ruler for all and as a mediator for the entire world, those whom he could not persuade to unite with him, he conquered by force of arms. And he brought together into one body all men everywhere, united and mixing in one great loving cup, as it were, men's lives, their characters, their marriages, their very habits of life. He asked them all to consider as their fatherland, not a specific place, but the entire inhabited world, the whole ecumeny. To consider as their stronghold and protection his camp, as akin to them, as relatives to them, all good men, and to consider as foreigners only the wicked. That they should not distinguish between Greeks and foreigners by Greek cloaks or usages or by scimitars and jackets, but that the distinguishing mark of a Greek should be seen in virtue, and that of the foreigner in iniquity. Clothing and food, marriage and manner of life they should regard as common to all, being blended into one by ties of blood and children. This is what Alexander did, and he made his army angry when he did it. He conquered the Persian Empire, and then instead of abolishing it and enslaving its people, he set himself up as the great king. He considered himself the successor to Darius, whom he had defeated, and he had his people, the Macedonians and the Greeks, marry the Persians to make of them a single people. It didn't work very well because he died and then his successors devolved again into warring states. But the Romans considered themselves in their propaganda, in their ideals, to be the inheritors of the dream of Alexander, to make all people into one. The Roman Empire was unique, similar only to the Greeks under Alexander, because they conquered people, and then over the course of 2 generations and 3 generations, they made them into Roman citizens. They assimilated them instead of enslaving them and ruling them and dominating them. This was because the Romans had an idea. The Romans considered that they were the best people in the world, and that they had the right to rule not just the Mediterranean, but the entire world, the entire humanity, the whole inhabited world. So under Augustus, they thought that they had fulfilled this. All the kings of the world, even from China, sent embassies to bring tribute to Augustus in Rome. So even if Augustus, the emperor, did not rule directly over them, they had shown the respect that was due to the ruler of the world. This was Roman propaganda. It did not reflect the reality, but it reflected the idea, what they thought should be the case. And the Christians who lived in that period were all Romans, and they shared fully in this basic assumption that the Roman emperor was the king, or rather the leader, the father of the entire world. There is a hymn that we sing in Christmas that we usually sing in Greek, but I'll read it in English because I want you to hear what it means. And again, it's in the ancient Greek, so those of you who learned Katarevosa will know it in Greek, but those of you who didn't might not. So we'll say it in English. When Augustus reigned alone upon the earth. This is Roman propaganda in the church's hymns. The many kingdoms of men came to an end, as Alexander had dreamed. And when you, O Lord, were made man of the pure virgin, the many gods of idolatry were destroyed. The cities of the world passed under one single rule, and the nations came to believe in one sovereign Godhead. The peoples were enrolled by the decree of Caesar, and we, the faithful, were enrolled in the name of the Godhead. When you, our God, were made man, great is your mercy, glory to you. Okay, you've heard that Stalinika as many years as you've been alive in the church. But in English, it's significant because it combines the Greek ideal of Alexander, the Roman ideal of ruling the entire world, and the Christian ideal from the Gospels, that God came to save all mankind, not just the Jews, not just the Greeks, not just the Romans, but all men. Alexander's dream could not be fulfilled by military might. When he died, his dream died with him. The Roman ideal could not be fulfilled even by the might of the legions, because eventually the barbarians came in and tore it all down. What fulfills the dream of Hellenism, this dream that all men should be brothers, that all who are virtuous be considered Greeks, what fulfills it is Christianity. And this is the basic idea that gave life and substance to the Eastern Roman Empire that we call Byzantium. This is the heritage of the modern Greek Orthodox people. When we say we are Greek Orthodox, it is more than just that we are Greek, that we have Greek blood in our veins, or that we speak the Greek language, although we must speak the Greek language. We must learn and teach and understand the Greek language of Scripture and of the liturgy, if at all possible. But it remains this universal idea. This is something, when I was asked to speak, they said, talk about the history of Orthodoxy and talk about yourself too. So, as you know, Zenime Elinas, I am not a Greek. I have no Greek yaya or great yaya. I don't have any Greek blood at all. My family comes from all over the world, but mostly my father's family are from Switzerland. So I will say sometimes as a joke, my family is from the very, very, very northwestern part of Ibilis. So,
Close.
yeah, close. It's only a few hundred miles, right? So, but I'm a Greek Orthodox priest. And when I come into the church, people always ask me, what are you doing here?
Oh.
Okay? okay? Many of you maybe have asked Presbytera, now, you're not Greek, no? And she says, no. But Father, he is Greek, right? I've heard this conversation told to me 1,000 times. And she says, no, he's not Greek. Okay? And the response is always, are you sure? So. So, but this is the point. We think of ourselves in the church sometimes as only Greek. We think that our church is only for the elites. It is for everybody. And if we open our doors to the people, then we fulfill the dream of Alexandros Omegas. We fulfill the dream of the Roman emperors. We fulfill this idea that Augustus was king of the whole world, but much more importantly, Christ is the God of all the world. And we fulfill our calling that was given to us at our baptism. Now, which of you can tell me what is the gospel that we read at the baptism service? Okay. The gospel is the end of Matthew. And I will find it and read it in Greek and in English. Because I should say something in Greek, in English, Christ, well, I should. In English, Christ says, before he ascends into heaven, go into all the world and preach this gospel to all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you, and behold, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Ελληνικά. Έτσι. Και προσελθόν ο Ιησούς ελάλησεν αυτοίς λέγον, εδόθη πάσα εξουσία εν ουρανό και επί γης. Πορευθέντες μαθητεύσατε πάντα τα έθνη, βαπτίζοντες αυτούς εις το όνομα του Πατρός και του Υιού και του Αγίου Πνεύματος, διδάσκοντες αυτούς τηρήν πάντα όσα ενετιλάμην ημίν. Και ιδού εγώ μεθ ημών είμαι πάσας τας ημέρας έως της συντελείας του αιώνος. Αμήν. This is the call, this is the responsibility that the Greek Orthodox have, to go into the world. We did that. Ne? All of you went out of Greece and came edo, to teach the gospel to all nations. We're doing that. You have me, Imedo. You have other Xeni who are in the church. Many of you or your daughters or your sons have married Xeni. And by this they are brought into the church, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. We do that as often as we can. If they don't want to be baptized, then we welcome them as family anyway. And we teach them and we show them what the life of an Orthodox Christian is. Teaching them to observe all that God has commanded to us. This is where we live by example. We fast, we pray, we show philanthropy for those whom we can, even when they come over and over again and appear to be taking advantage of us. I know one of you gave money, thank you. All of you as the Philoptochos, you do very good at teaching the people who see you to observe all the things that Christ has commanded. We all try, we fail, but for the Christian, the most important thing is love and forgiveness. Finally, the promise. Behold, Christ says, I am with you always, even to the end of the age, which is the mystery and the truth of what we do in Ecclesia. You know what the priests say to each other when they greet one another at the altar? Right before the creed. No? That's right. And what is the response? He is and never shall be. In, he was, ke in, and is, in case the ke in. Now I'm forgetting my Greek. But it is he was, and he is, and he shall be. So, in case the ke in. So, this is the reality that we celebrate. Christ is with us at all times. We are blessed by his presence. We are blessed by his love. And we are called ourselves to exemplify and be the love of Christ for the world. This is what the Philoptochos does. We've been talking about how you're going to do it all evening. It was a long meeting. Thank you for your patience, and thank you for your generosity, and thank you for your attention to me. I hope it was at least somewhat interesting.
That was very good, Father.
There is one more thing that I'll say as a matter of trivia. There's an interesting letter that talks about how important the emperor is. Now, you all have seen in the icon that there is a difference between how an ancient bishop is dressed as opposed to how the modern bishop is dressed, right? The ancient bishops wore the same vestment that the priests wear, the Philonium, but they wore it with many crosses on it. It was a special design that looks like a checkerboard. The modern bishops, they don't wear the Philonium anymore. They wear what is called the Sakos. It is the long, it comes about to the knee, and it has bells on it. So, there's a reason for this, and let us go back to the beginning, very briefly. The church, as it developed, as the Hellenistic ideal, and the Roman ideal, and the Christian gospel all came together, the person that brought them together was Annunciation, the emperor. And the emperor had a central role in the life of the church. He wasn't the boss of any single bishop or of any of the bishops. His role, they are patriarchal people. They have the father of the family is the leader, right? The Romans were even more so, and they had the notion of the pater familias, who had the responsibility to care for and have authority over his entire family and all of the families that were dependent on him. The emperor in Rome, his role developed as the pater familias, as the patriarch of the entire empire. He was the wealthiest man. He gave support and money to all of the poor and fed them and so forth. So this was his role. He took on the same role for the Christians. So when the Christians were arguing, when there was a disagreement or a dissension, the emperor would call the bishops together into council to discuss the problem, to resolve it, and to reunite the church. This is what happened as soon as Annunciation became a Christian. He called the bishops together to the city of Nicaea to deal with the heresy of Arius. We'll talk about this another time. The bishops always were in charge of the local church, but the emperor had the responsibility to protect and maintain and uphold the Christian people everywhere. So if you read the newspaper, you see sometimes the President of the United States or the Senate or the House of Representatives, they will send protest letters to China because of human rights, right? The emperor would do the same thing for Christians. If the Persians were persecuting Christians in the 4th century or the 5th century, the emperor would send a letter saying stop doing that, or sometimes would send an army to say stop doing that. Usually it was a letter. Armies were expensive. But there was the idea that the emperor was the protector of all Christians everywhere. In the 14th century, the Russian people had been converted to Christianity. They were developing a stronger and stronger kingdom at the same time as the empire in Constantinople was becoming very weak with the Turks attacking. At the end of the 1300s, Constantinople's empire, what the emperor actually ruled, was not much more than the city itself. Because of this, an ambitious ruler in Moscow of the Russian people decided that it was time for his church to stop praying for the emperor and to start praying for him. It made him special. The patriarch in Constantinople wrote him a letter. And I'll read the whole thing because it's interesting. He says, the Holy Emperor has a great place in the church, for he is not like other rulers or governors of other regions. This is so because from the beginning the emperors established and confirmed the true faith in all the ecumeni, the inhabited world. They convoked the ecumenical councils and confirmed and decreed the acceptance of the pronouncements of the divine and holy canons regarding the correct doctrines and the government of Christians. They struggled against the heresies and imperial decrees together with councils established the metropolitan sees of the hierarchs and the divisions of their provinces and the delineation of their districts, etc., etc. For this reason, the emperors enjoy great honor and position in the church, for even if, by God's permission, the nations, primarily the Turks, have constricted the authority and domain of the emperor, still to this day, the emperor possesses the same charge from the church, and the same rank and the same prayers from the church. The Basileus, the emperor, is anointed with the great chrisma, the great myrrh, and is appointed the Basileus and Autocrator, the emperor of the Romans, that is to say, of the Christians. Everywhere the name of the emperor is commemorated by all patriarchs and metropolitans and bishops, wherever men are called Christians, a thing which no other ruler or governor ever received. Indeed, he enjoys such great authority over all that even the Latins themselves, who are not in communion with our church, render him the same honor and submission which they did in the old days when they were united with us. So much more so do Orthodox Christians owe such recognition to him. Therefore, my son, he's talking to the king of the Russians, you are wrong to affirm that we have the church without the emperor, for it is impossible for Christians to have a church and no empire. Now, this is a problem, or was a big problem for the church when Constantinople fell 50 years later. Yeah. Because the patriarch had been saying, you have to have an emperor to have a united church. What happened when the emperor fell? The bishops changed their vestments. They stopped wearing the philonium, and they started wearing the sakos. The sakos had been the one item of vestment that was not worn by a clergyman. It was the vestment that was worn by the emperor. Because the emperor, because he had such an important place in the church, would go through the holy gates into the altar and receive communion at the holy table with the priests. When there was no longer an emperor, the bishops began to wear the sakos, and they started to wear the mitre, the crown. Not to say that they were the emperor, not to say that any one of them was the one who protected and upheld the entire church, not to say that any one of them was the pope, but so that the role, the purpose, the function of the emperor would continue. And what is the function? To maintain that all Orthodox everywhere are one church. This was what the emperor did above all. He was the symbol and the one who maintained the church as a single people. That the most important thing for anyone who calls himself a Christian is not that they are Russian, or Greek, or Albanian, or Romanian, but that they are a Christian. This is why the bishops wear these things, and this is the role and responsibility of the bishop. Do we understand? It's complicated, I know, because we don't think about the emperor that way. We have gotten finally over the hangover that we had from the loss of the empire. Though I tell you that the Orthodox people throughout the world had a huge problem when the emperor ceased to be, because there had always been an emperor. So, salam. Any questions?
Salam.
Question?
No,
Gus.
it's not a question. I want to inform everybody. Does anybody know the Prime Minister of Russia, Vladimir Putin? Which wife he finds? He's married to her. His wife.
Who is his wife?
I don't know, Gus.
She's Greek.
Είναι, Ελληνίδα είναι.
Από την
Δεν
Πελοπόννησο, από τις Πελοποννήσικα μέρη.
Δεν ήξερα.
That was in a newspaper about a year ago.
I didn't know that.
Vladimir Putin's wife is the Greek. She's Greek born. I thought maybe it would be good.
Father, what happened or what made you decide to embrace the Greek Orthodox and to become a priest?
Okay.
Such a nice one.
Okay. I grew up in the, Pentecostal churches.
Yeah.
Okay. That was where I grew up. Pentecostal churches like to say that they are like the apostles had the church, but they're not. They try very hard. They have a great zeal and a great devotion to God, but what they have created is not like the ancient church, because what is like the ancient church? We are. So I grew up looking for the ancient church, and Greek I go. So as for why I became a priest, that's harder to answer. I knew when I became Orthodox that the church needed priests, and I had studied ancient Greek in college, and when you study ancient Greek, they make a joke to you. They say, oh, you're going to learn ancient Greek, and then you'll give people fries along with their ancient Greek, right? You'll work in the fast food restaurant, because what else does the classicist do? Well, the classicist can either work at McDonald's or he can be a priest. So I became a priest.
Father, I've heard many people say they'd like to go see Constantinople or go visit the Holy Land. Have you thought about taking a group of...
I thought about it. It's probably something I won't do for 10 years. However, I should announce that His Eminence Metropolitan Nicholas, as Florence can attest, is currently serving on the Holy Synod in Constantinople. Now, because he's going, he is inviting the priests of the metropolis and the laity, if they would like to go with him in Poli, they are welcome. So if you would like to go to the city, if you would like to go with His Eminence to Constantinople and have the tour from the Patriarchate, then let me know, give me your name, and I'll forward you on to the metropolis. He will be going until this coming March, so it's a limited amount of time. But Florence, you went. Did you talk to the group about it?
Father?
You probably talked to them about it.
February.
Yeah, okay.
February is the last time that you will be going. So if any of you would like to go, you could go with me maybe sometime if I ever go, but much better to go with the bishops.
Oh, and also, I don't know if you know, but sometimes Bishop Savas is taken. I know somebody who knows.
Yes.
In other words, Father, they're going to the protection of the Archbishop.
Right. So, other questions? No questions?
Father, how was the decision made? Was there a synod to adopt the Sakos? I mean, how did they?
I don't think there was a synod. As I understand it, more just happened. And it's more interesting because of the time that it happened and the significance that the bishop had, or rather that the emperor had. I assumed that they adopted it for that reason. You know, with the absence of the emperor, someone needed to wear what had been the marks and the regalia of the unity of the church. Nothing else? I must have been very thorough. Thank you all. Have a wonderful night.